Chapter 10. The Road North. Katarin came toward them unhurried and stopped just outside the chalked circle. Anne-Lena at his side in white like sunlight on fresh snow, her veil still absent, her face radiant with relief. He lifted both hands. At the tip of each finger a bead of cold light kindled, weather magic drawing a high, thin cloud across the sun, just enough to veil it and sanctify the moment. His voice was pitched to carry without shrillness. "People of the pass," he called. "You gathered to witness a contest and a judgment. You have witnessed a choice instead. I claim no blood price from Sir Alaris of the Lakes. I accept the forswearing of his king's bargain regarding my bride." He turned a fraction toward Anne-Lena, and even the most romance-calloused citizen present softened at what was in his face. "Whom I will wed before this day's last bell." A cheer went up for the coming wedding. He faced the crowd again. "And under old law, older than storms, older than any crown to the north, the dragon chooses her mate, and the mate chooses the dragon. It is an ancient covenant, commanded by fate and magic. Will any here dispute it?" His glance swept the watchers like a levelled blade. None answered, but with shouted blessings and a few weeping laughs. Alaris straightened, his hands still at Alyssa's waist, and raised his voice, not a crier's practised bellow, but the steady resonance of a man speaking an oath he had authored long ago. "I, Alaris of the Lakes, swore my oath not to the Northern King, nor to his crown, but to my lady, the Princess Anne-Lena. My loyalty has always been hers. My oath stands unbroken, for to choose by my heart was my lady's own command. On this day, as she marries you, my loyalty becomes yours through her." Alyssa gave a short, incredulous laugh, the brighter twin of a sob. Anne-Lena clapped her hands once, irrepressible, before catching herself and composing the dignity of a bride. She had forgotten that where he was to have said to the Northern Crown, he had said to my Lady Anne-Lena, Princess of the North, and her father had been enraged, and the oath was already taken, and there had been nothing the king could do. That small defiance, read at the time as no more than boyish exuberance, had shaped the fates of all of them. Katarin inclined his head gravely. "Let it be so." Gasps rippled outward through the crowd. He cleared his throat with impeccably timed irreverence. "And let it be written that the dragon Alyssa Fair has secured her mate with minimal property damage. For a change." The laughter broke the tension neatly in half. Even the guards grinned into their disciplined neutrality. "What now?" Alaris murmured low enough for her alone. "Now," she said, her voice steadier, an ancient certainty settling into its proper place. "We breathe. We stand at the ceremony and let them braid flowers and ring bells. We eat 2 sweet cakes. We dance. We send a polite, razor-edged letter to your king, informing him that his bargaining chip has wed herself elsewhere and his knight is not dead, merely inconveniently alive and unavailable. And after—" her eyes darkened, a promise smouldering in them. "After, we renegotiate the definition of sleep." Colour climbed his ears despite himself. She saw it, and was delighted. "Still blushes," she mouthed, as if settling some private wager. Quicker than he would have believed, a circle had formed, holding each pair at its centre in turn. The square that had been an arena became, by the ordinary magic of a willing and cheering crowd, a sanctuary of woven garlands and hastily raised awnings. Anne-Lena stood beneath an arch of mountain laurel, Katarin across from her, a solemn priest between, the weather above them holding preternaturally gentle as he had promised. And he vowed, in words so plain they were almost scandalous for the day, to tend her hours and to listen when silence is the better counsel. She answered with vows as unadorned and all the more piercing for it. The first cascade of bells broke over them as the crowd roared its blessing. The second rite was simpler and came after the bells had spent themselves. Alyssa faced Alaris in the same spot, no efficient now, no parchment to set the bounds. Their friends and the townsfolk stood as guests, to a thing that could have been done as well on a desolate mountaintop with no witness at all, for the magic needed none to bind. But people do, and so they stood for it anyway. "Do you come of your own free will?" she asked. "Will you stand by me while I burn, for more than a mortal's share of sunrises if fate allows it, and not one more than mine?" "Yes," his voice was steady. "True." He swallowed. "And will you give me the sky? Will you give me a reason to face each day, and remind me to live for its joy and not its burdens?" It felt a foolish thing to ask. He needed to know it anyway. Her answering smile came slow and proud. Yes, she leaned in, and, without the theatre of the other ceremony, bit him, just a press of teeth where neck met shoulder, breaking the skin, waking the blood magic of the mate bond. Heat flared. The scale mark formed over his heart, glowing visible through the steel that cased him, flaring once to a sharp brilliance, and then settling to a low, quiet ember he knew, without knowing how he knew, to be permanent, and with it came the full weight of their joining. It left him breathless a moment. The ceremony was done, bread was broken, wine poured, the musicians struck up a tune, and the city, so taut at dawn, pivoted into celebration with the mercurial ease of people long used to fickle weather, who preferred joy when given any excuse for it. As the afternoon leaned toward gold, Alaris stood at the parapet above the square, his gauntlets off, his bare hands flat on the sun-warmed stone. Elissa came to lean beside him, hip against his. No dragon spectacle now, only a woman set shoulder to shoulder with him, in a way that felt older than a century and brand new at once. "Regret?" she asked quietly, not quite teasing. He considered the streets glowing below, the weight of a life now stretching far past any mortal reckoning. The certain wrath of the Northern King, who would soon receive a letter made of courtesy wrapped around disappointments. "No," he said, and the word rang clean inside him, settling into all the hollow's duty had gnawed. "If anything, only that I waited until the last dramatic instant to find my courage. It seems I have a flair for the theatrical after all." She huffed a soft laugh and slid her hand into his. Their pulses, already learning the map of one another, found a shared cadence and held it. "I'll teach you to be good at it," she whispered, against his neck. Behind them the bells shifted into a higher, faster peal, playful, insistent, the city's unambiguous order to stop brooding and rejoin the revels. "Come then," he said. "Let them see the dragon dance. And after that I'll take you flying," she offered, turning, her eyes kindling. He smiled. A rare, unguarded thing. "I already am." The notion came later through the pleasant blur of wine and music, and refused to pop like the bubble it should have been. A letter would be safe, Anne-Lena thought. A sealed reassurance sent north to soothe a father's pride and close a political ledger. And yet ink felt suddenly far too small a thing. Why send parchment when the people and the promises could walk through the palace gates themselves? She would not come home a runaway bride dragged back in contrition. She would arrive as the acknowledged consort of the southern heir, escorted by the prince who had mastered the storm that once threatened kingdoms, in a procession so unmistakably formal that no one could conveniently call it an abduction. The wine made the words bold. She climbed onto a bench and called for silence. Shock met her first, then incredulous laughter, then a swell of approval that even sobriety could not undo the next morning. The plan survived daylight and the careful scrutiny of Katarin's strategic mind. "What can he truly do?" she asked in the quiet. "Throw us all in a dungeon? He'd have to build new ones first with a storm-proof roof and a dragon-proof floor." "Chaining me is no easy task," Elissa offered dryly, and everyone took it for the dragon's blessing on the scheme. The preparing stretched into weeks and, absurdly, began by going the opposite way entirely, south to the court of the Southern King, to gather the letters of accreditation and the standing such a procession required. In the time between ledgers and arrangements, Elissa did not write. She flew to keep the boundary between flame and feeling supple, and to teach Alaris the subtle grammar of her movement while he sat harnessed to her back. At first, she lifted him no higher than the watchtower roofs, letting him learn how her spine flexed before a banking turn. Soon he could stand through a glide and unclip a harness ring to practice the resettling that would keep them both alive in evasive flight. His plate mail went into storage, too heavy and too rigid for a dragon's withers, and the magistrate's craftsman built him something between a riding habit and wool-lined leather armour, studded with steel rings for strapping gear to himself or, more often, himself to his wife. One indigo dusk, she folded her wings without warning into a controlled drop, the air tearing past in a shrieking ribbon while the wall guards bellowed in collective horror. Alaris gripped her neck with knees and core and gave himself to the fall, and their link widened until they were one creature with two bodies. She flared a breath before she tore them out of the dive. Word of it reached Katarin, who banned any further deliberate freefalls over the city. He signed the order Lena drafted and slapped it down before the two of them, who regarded it with open contempt. The rule covered only the skies above the city, and no one watched the mountain lakes. They simply took the more dramatic endeavours where no eyes could find them, and from a wild descent straight down into some high meadow, it was no distance at all to other, more private uses of all that widened connection, under the cool, clear autumn sky. The caravan went south at first light under a sky rinsed clean by night rain, the four of them at its heart, a ring of guards who had trained beneath Alyssa's exacting eye, and did not gawk when she shed one skin for another, and the clerks and coffers a formal mission required. The southern capital rose from terraces of pale stone, and the welcome there was neither warm nor cold, but careful. The great hall's banners freshly scrubbed, as though history itself had been readied for inspection. The king and queen did not run forward and did not embrace. Form held, because form was all they had left themselves. The whole reunion ran in a narrow code, talk of seeding schedules that meant the storms no longer flood the fields, of outlying villages that meant the sun looked outward in his exile, not in. Each careful question, a ledger recalculating the cost of abandonment against the cost of return. Alyssa watched the fine tremor that ran through Katarin when memory pressed against his restraint, and remembered the confused child she had once found alone in the southern waste, still clutching his quilt and crying for a mother who had let him be cast out, his grief calling down a torrent of rain. He could accept this quiet truce, perhaps. She found she could not for a mother who would abandon a frightened child to the wild, wild magic or no. They stayed only as long as the ritual demanded. The king granted every document they asked for without haggling, and asked for no promises he sensed would not be given. And he handed Katarin a private seal of the southern house, heir's status, weighed with symbolic permission without being made to. Katarin accepted it without comment, and felt the pang of it. He had expected to have to demand the seal, and it had simply been given. Which meant his brother was not missing, but dead. How or why he was not told, and did not ask. There would be a time for that. This was not it. The road north leaned the land back towards severity, trees thinning to lean bone, frost silvering the grass at dawn, ravens looping ahead in black glints. Evenings turned from celebration to the quiet mapping of one another's old silences. Alyssa traced the thin white lines of his scars and asked which had been a training error and which a necessity. Alaris told her the Cain story and the oath he had crafted to tether himself to a person rather than a crown, and the beating he had taken as the price of telling a king that flesh outranks metal. She told him in turn of the first winter alone, when she had not hunted for 3 days because choosing to live had felt like complicity with a history she had not yet forgiven herself for surviving. They traded no comforting promises. They offered presents instead, and found it the stronger medicine. On the 17th morning, the northern border fortress rose out of a low bank of pearl fog, stone clenching the ridge like a fist, pennons snapping in a wind that smelled of iron and water. Horns announced them. The gate crews moved with a drilled precision that edged toward stiffness when the dragons settled some bowshots out, a rumble pushing fine gravel across their boots. The captain who rode out to investigate was a good deal less certain than he tried to appear. His eyes catalogued it all: dragon, southern prince, northern princess, renegade knight, a sharp escort, and a royal carriage carrying two intertwined heraldic truths. And somewhere in there, he placed the smug man riding the dragon's shoulders as Sir Alaris, whom he had cause to remember from a youthful prank that had once left him clinging to a log in the castle moat. This, he judged, was not the moment to repay it. "State your purpose," he said with clipped courtesy. Anne Lenna nudged her mare half a length forward. She had stepped down from the carriage expressly to speak as a woman on her own feet. "We come as an accredited southern mission, bearing letters of alliance," she answered, level, "and as a northern princess returning on her own terms." The captain did his arithmetic slowly. Fewer than 30, no invading horde. The princess unmistakably herself. The dragon plainly extending a courtesy by halting at the wall at all. Diplomacy, then, not war, and well above his station. He hesitated only a breath. "You will be received," he said. His voice held steady, though the muscle at his temple betrayed a man recalculating a simple gate opening into something history might one day footnote. The great gate rolled outward and the grate lifted. They advanced at a measured walk, Elissa pacing them on clawed feet, wings furled, head lowered just enough to accept the courtesy of entry while reserving the right to reconsider it on the instant. The gate was barely wide enough to take her behind the carriage. Above, the ravens lifted together and wheeled north, a black script against pale sky, carrying word that the old order was about to be made, to look directly at the shape of what it had built and never meant to. Alaris glanced down at her as they cleared the tunnel's cold shadow. "Here we go," he said through the bond. "For better or worse," she answered the same way, and the words settled like a foundation stone beneath the next thing they had yet to face. The gate had only ever been a formality. The real test was waiting at the king's castle. Chapter 11. The King Speaks. Northern protocol preferred arrivals measured, layered, and properly announced up 3 sets of heraldic steps. What the court received instead began as a neat tableau, the great gate groaning open, the royal carriage rolling in at a stately pace, its lacquer catching a thin northern sun. Courtiers arranged themselves in precise arcs around the vast, open courtyard, a bloom of velvet, fur, and winter-still faces. The king himself stood at the far end before the shallow rise of the red stair, expression carved into regal composure, gloved hands resting one over the other, atop an ebony cane he did not need but used like a punctuation mark. Then the light dimmed, a shadow eclipsed the sun, and every head tilted up with the same ungoverned, half-fearful, half-childlike reflex. Elissa came out of the high glare a living emerald sigil, wings folded to knife the air into a spiralling descent. Alaris crouched balanced low between the ridge of her shoulders, leather armour dark, hair whipped back, his outline impossible and effortless at once. 10 feet above the flagstones she rolled, one full, extravagant turn that drew involuntary gasps. Then compressed that motion into something impossibly controlled. Mid-roll, scales ran like quicksilver backward into skin and silk. The dragon narrowed to a woman. Alaris dropped the short distance left to fall, landing in a low, braced crouch. Elissa, now a lady in a deep green dress, alive with a drift of captured light, cradled in his arms as though the stunt had only ever been designed to set her down without a crease. Reverently he placed her on her feet, then he straightened, voice carrying cleanly to stone and silk and throne alike. "I have fulfilled my oath, King of the North. Receive back your daughter, Princess Anne Lenna of your blood. Receive as well Crown Prince Kataran of the South, her husband." Exactly on the last syllable, the carriage drew up to the mouth of the red carpet, timbers sighing into stillness. Doors opened. Anne Lena descended first, no trace of nervous haste, wearing a winter-white gown trimmed in northern blue she had insisted on having made the week before they left. Katarin followed, Stormlight muted to a courteous shimmer, offering his arm with a neutrality that revealed nothing of the old feuds coiled silently beneath. A ripple moved through the court, surprise displacing contempt, curiosity punching small holes in composure. The king had no choice. Protocol had already been invoked aloud with witnesses. He came forward 3 formal paces and gave the shallow inclination required when a foreign heir presented himself within your stone under promise of safe conduct. His face remained unreadable through the rest of the courtyard choreography. The exchange of clipped titles, the acknowledgement of letters still sealed, the first ritual silence to allow hostile gods, should any be listening, their chance to strike. Nothing did. The show ended. The real audience began only once heavy doors muffled the courtyard, and the 4 of them stood within his study facing the king in private. The study was a long room of dark wood and angled northern light. Its tapestries worked not with battles, but with harvests. A fire snapped in the grate. Above it the ancestral blade hung, bare and biting. The accreditation letters, 3, neatly tied, were set upon the wide map table. The king's hand touched the bundle as though about to draw it nearer by reflex of a lifetime. He did not lift them. The mask cracked along a line that had been long under stress. "What?" he said softly, which was worse than a shout. "Have you done?" The first explosion struck Alaris. The fury there was not theatrical. It was born of genuine expectation betrayed. Words like duty, charge, sovereign trust struck like thrown iron. Alaris absorbed them standing straight, eyes steady, saying nothing until the king's voice sharpened into an accusation of oath-breaking. Then he answered, quietly but firmly, "My oath, Majesty, has never been to your throne. It was and remains to your daughter. You knew the words differed when I spoke them. You let them stand." Memory flared behind the king's eyes. The day, years past. A newly dubbed knight, refusing the scribe's formula and bleeding lip onto a different pledge. The rage shifted vector instantly, seeking a surface that would give a more satisfying purchase. It found Katarin next. Sorcery, seduction, theft, political insolence. Accusation piled like snow squalls. Katarin let him spend 3, 4, 5 sentences. On the 6th, he lifted a hand, not in warding, but in simple request to be permitted to thread a truth through the gale. "She wrote to me first," he said, asking for discourse, later for rescue from plans she had not authored. Every act since has been her choice. I only ever refrained from abandoning myself when the loneliness cut, because her letters kept arriving and required answers. If there is theft, it is mutual. It is. The anger wheeled again, now almost frantic in its search for a target that would justify the heat that had sustained it through sleepless months. It landed on Anne Lena. Unfilial, ungrateful, reckless. She listened until the edge dulled into repetition. Then she crossed the small distance between them, set both her hands, calm, warm, scarless, around one of his still clenched fists on the table. "Father," she said, plain, unornamented, "you taught me to read the ledgers. Your marriage plans were accounts balanced and debts settled. I am not an entry to be traded. I chose my own way. I am safe. I am loved. I did not burn, starve, or shatter. Look at me and tally what is, not what fear told you my own choice would be." Something in him collapsed inward then, not into defeat, but into the hollow behind a long-held brace. He inhaled, sharp, exhaled like a punctured bellows. Grief showed itself in its original shape, no longer honed into weaponry. For a moment, she was not the political piece he had once intended to marry east. She was the child who used to fall asleep on tax rolls. His gaze travelled at last to the woman in green who had stood half a pace offset, poised without presumption, watching every change in wind and temperature inside the room while outwardly still as a carved saint. His eyes catalogued the talk at her throat, the faint heat shimmer emanating from the silk, the scale-patterned ghosts at her wrists where light insisted on remembering another form. "And this," he asked, the question stripped bare, "is who?" Alaris, before thought could counsel caution, answered with a swiftness that was its own avowal. "My wife," he said, and after the barest beat added the word that tasted like fire and permanence, "and my mate." Silence again. Then the king slumped, not theatrically, but into a chair that had held his weight through births, funerals, harvest famines, and the quiet arithmetic of power. He massaged the bridge of his nose with thumb and forefinger, a mortal gesture that made the crown on the distant stand look suddenly heavy rather than holy. "My stone-faced knight, who refused to even look at another woman than my daughter," he murmured, almost to himself, willingly complicit to a fated entanglement with a dragon. Dry incredulity threaded the words, and then, as if some hidden artisan inside him finally conceded that the tapestry had always been this pattern, wry acceptance followed. The gods have a violent sense of humour. I am evidently the punchline. It would be rude not to laugh. He could not help himself. "You were born to play with fire, it seems, Sir Alaris." No one laughed aloud, but tension uncoupled like rusted links easing apart. Elissa inclined her head, not a subordinate dip, but an acknowledgement between custodians of different kinds of power. "I will not burn your halls," she said softly, answering the fear he had never spoken aloud, "unless someone attempts chains." A strangled sound that might have been unintended amusement escaped him. "If anyone attempts chains," he said, voice gone hoarse around the rough edge of reluctant trust, "I will advise them to write their wills first and take their attempt far away from my property." He let his hand fall open on the table. The letters, forgotten until now, still lay sealed. He drew them to him finally, cracked each with the small ivory blade, scanned the flowing southern and careful northern counter-signatures. Formal recognition hovered one handspan from being consummated. "Stay," he said at last, each syllable a concession and an invitation. "Dine. Let the court stare itself into civility. We will argue policy tomorrow, when I have practiced not mistaking protection for possession." Dinner transformed formality into something almost human. They ate in a narrower hall, oak-long table, fewer ears, fire in the hearth burning warm and bright. The king did not toast, but midway through the third course he asked Elissa, haltingly with genuine curiosity, the way one feels out a foreign grammar, how high she could fly before the cold turned her back. She answered matter-of-factly, describing how the air thinned and sound changed the higher she went, and he listened as though mapping a frontier he had never been permitted to chart. Lena coaxed an old anecdote from him about Alaris at 14, misjudging the intentions of a secret couple in court and revealing them in the most embarrassing manner. Katarin contributed a discreetly embellished tale of a southern courtier's attempt to get him to provide a weather favour well beyond his ability at the time, to woo a lady. Laughter, unforced, unweaponized, made a brief, astonished circuit around the table and settled. Later, long after candles guttered low and corridors had gone to hush, the king sat alone in the study he had once used as a fortress against loss. Outside, a dragon's silhouette crossed the moon, one slow pass, a guarding arc, not a threat, but a statement of presence. He watched it without flinching, trying to find the small blessing that must be hidden in the ruin of his long-laid plans. He felt he could almost see it. His daughter was married happily, it seemed, and an alliance with the South sounded promising. The boy who he had seen at the Southern Court many years ago, barely in control of his rapidly growing power, seemed to have mastered his magic fully and could take up the Southern crown successfully in a few years. And what Sir Alaris did was no longer his concern. There was a little blessing in that too. The man had always been talented, but straightforward in most unexpected and unwelcome ways. In the morning there would be petitions and lords with opinions and treaties, to re-ink with adjusted names. For that night, in the stillness earned by fury spent and grief acknowledged, the Northern King let himself believe that surrendering the illusion of control had not meant surrendering the future. It only meant naming truly what had already changed and choosing to stand inside it rather than outside hammering at a locked door between. Chapter 12, Going Home. The next morning court business tightened around the king, Katarin, and Anne-Lena like a net of quills and parchments. Alaris had no wish to stand like a decorative spear in corners, while treaties were re-inked and phrases softened into something both sides could later claim as victory. So he left them to the alchemy of governance and went out in search of a clearer sky, one above familiar places. Alyssa met him, impatience a bright flex in the bond. "Show me," she said simply. They launched from an upper terrace, her wings beating twice before they found a current. The capital fell away, grey geometry giving over to winter fields, and then to the gentler patterned patchwork of the royal lands. When Alaris offered his mind's eye in guidance, she banked, angling toward a low green shoulder of country where a manor house sat balanced between river bend and sheltering copse. Stone less austere than royal keep, ivy softening edges, smoke lifting steady, domestic, unself-conscious. He did not warn the household. They repeated the courtyard descent with even more flourish, an unnecessary roll, a last-second contraction, until Alyssa was human again and Alaris stepped down with her in his arms. A shriek, half alarm, half involuntary wonder, cut the air. Then the front doors burst wide and Lady Liana, who had seen the show from her favourite sitting room window, stopped on the steps, one hand to her mouth, the other already lifted in delighted, disbelieving recognition. Alaris. He barely had time to set Alyssa upright before he was enveloped in a fabric and lavender embrace, fierce enough to satisfy a decade's worth of half-suppressed fears in one compression of ribs. When she released him, she looked at Alyssa with a brightness that suggested she had decided in a single instant to approve everything and nodded at her warmly. "You could have sent word," she scolded Alaris, which was as close as she would come to confessing her heart had tried to seize. Her gaze flicked up and down Alyssa's figure. The green, the talk, the clear confidence. "So, a dragon is who my son chose," she said briskly, as if appraising the formal attire of someone she had fully expected would not bother to dress at all. "At last the boy has someone. Welcome." They were steered inside for tea before a fire that had no aspirations of ceremony, just the practical steady blaze of a house that understood seasons intimately. Alaris endured 3 minutes of maternal inventory, scars new, scars fading, the health of his eyes, the deeper calm in his mouth's corners, before she circled to the subject she had waited years to ambush. "And grandchildren," she said lightly pouring. "Eventually. Of course, I will not pry about timeframes today." She lifted her cup with a prim little nod that fooled no one. Heat flashed through the bond, Alyssa's startled amusement, overlaid with a fleeting thread of ache so fine he almost missed it, mixed with his own embarrassment at his mother's brutal directness. Alyssa set her cup down with exaggerated care. "You do see what I am, yes?" Alyssa said, gentle, no offence taken. Lady Liana waved her deflection off. "I see a marriage. The rest is logistics. Nature is inventive when properly encouraged. And I see that encouragement already at work," she added, with a pointed look at Alaris's neck, which bore a few marks left by an intimate breakfast at the castle. Alaris blushed, as if he could cover the evidence by willing it. His mother's eyes had always been too sharp. A surprised laugh escaped Alyssa, bright and unguarded. "I would not object," she said after a beat, honest enough that Alaris felt something in his chest twist, hope he had not let himself even name. "But there are complexities." "Then complexities can line up and wait their turn," Lady Liana said decisively, as if speaking to petitioners. "I raised one stubborn miracle already. I am not above accepting another." Alyssa's face turned serious. "If that occasion were to come to pass, we might be forced to intrude upon you indeed." Alaris read an undercurrent of sadness through their bond and realized there must be another secret hidden there. Later, in the side garden where the winter rosemary still held a bruised green scent, Alaris walked with Lord Redder. His stepfather's silence held until they reached the low stone wall from which the river fields opened like a book. "We thought we might one day receive news," Redder said without looking at him. "Not that you had wed, that you had fallen, to battle, to oath, to grief, that you had decided the world did not need whatever it is you carry." He turned then, the old soldier's frankness laying out its simple relief. "So you bring home a dragon that is preferable." Alaris huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. "You were afraid I would bring home a man." "We were afraid you would not come at all," Redder corrected quietly. "Empty saddles make their own kind of conversation." They paced a while in a companionable crunch of gravel. Alaris told him then what he had not told his mother, the fullness of the bond, the scale mark, the shared pulse that would lengthen his years past the natural measure if fate did not cut them both violently short. Redder absorbed it without flinching. "So neither of you will one day sit alone," the older man said at last. "There are worse fates." "There is the risk of sharing every pain," Alaris answered, voicing the shadow he had not yet let shape into words. "Sharing dilutes pain," Redder said, "or at least keeps it from stagnating. And if death takes one, it takes both." Clean cut, his gaze settled on Alaris with something close to pride. "You always tried to keep ugliness for yourself and parcel out only the polished bits to others. This," he gestured at the invisible thread between Alaris and the manor's distant roof where Alyssa now took tea alone with her mother-in-law, "prevents that particular selfishness." Alaris had not expected comfort in those terms. He accepted it anyway, letting it slot into the architecture of his new life like a stone that, once placed, made the arch hold its shape. Alyssa made a rapid conquest of the estate with his guidance, the stable loft where a much younger Alaris had once slept, the low willow by the bend where, as a boy, he had first tried and failed to skip a flat river stone to the far bank. The disused tower stair he and the princes had raced until breath burned metallic. He showed her, as requested, all the places they played, but also the places he had never shown to the princess. A tucked-away wildflower dip where he had hidden to read alone, an overlook from which the whole valley at dawn looked like a pale sea with only the tallest hedges as dark shoals. She listened intently when he spoke, storing these inconsequential details with a value that humbled him. By the time dusk drew a lilac hush over the fields, they were airborne again. The manor's hearthlights receded to a warm scatter. The northern capital's angular mass rose ahead. Below, rivers became thin pewter blades sliding toward their own far obligations. They returned to find Anne Lenna half asleep in a chair near the study fire. Boots off, one leg folded under her, a sheaf of amended clauses sliding toward the floor. Katarin, opposite her, had ink on his thumb and the abstracted satisfaction of someone who had just concluded a negotiation without yielding the peace he refused to trade. Both looked up when the downdraft brushed the windows. "Alive," Katarin observed dryly. "And scaring the countryside," Anne Lenna added with approval before her eyes closed again. The remainder of their week in the northern court unfolded exactly as Alyssa had predicted that first morning, blissfully boring for those not summoned to councils, intensely draining for those who were. Alaris and Alyssa explored the fringes of the winter forest, tested currents above frozen farmlands, learned which guard towers tolerated an unexpected dragon alighting on their roofline with only a muttered oath, and which required an apologetic loaf of kitchen bread and a coin purse the next day. At night, Alaris listened to Anne Lenna untangle political knots aloud while Alyssa offered solutions. Burn it, always in the first 5, before more measured strategy followed. Katarin slept too little but, under Anne Lenna's calm, stopped trying to shape the weather indoors when a clause irked him. Departure brought no drama. The king clasped Alaris's forearm once, all the apology he would ever issue in so direct a form, and thanked Elissa for not making any costly repairs necessary, and any roofs that had suffered, he allowed, must surely have been weakened by time and due for mending anyway. Lady Liana sent them off with a package of dense fruit bread and a final pointed look at Elissa that translated to an expectation that made Alaris blush in her place. Reda's nod to Alaris held a new equality. Homeward wind favoured them. The royal carriage wheels hummed their steady song. Ravens shadowed only the first day, then peeled away as if satisfied the party required no witness. Midway through the passes, the air changed, subtly warmed by familiar mineral breath. Elissa's whole body answered before her mind did. The bond sang with anticipatory relief. Katarin's shoulders loosened imperceptibly. Anne Lena's expression softened into something that was neither court-face nor diplomatic mask but simple owned contentment. When at last the crenellated crown of the past city lifted over the ridge, those layered walls, the dark spike of the magistrate's tower, smoke pluming in patterns Katarin had seen 100 times before, cheers rose unbidden from the guard outriders. Even the horses seemed to find a reserve of energy, ears pricking towards stable scents remembered. They flew the last half-league. Alaris choosing to stand, arms out, trusting Elissa's minute corrections, letting the thin, bright cold sting his face awake. Below, townsfolk pointed, then waved. Someone rang a handbell out of sync with the proper pattern purely for joy. They sat down before the main gate as the bells shifted to evening call. Stone felt different underfoot, claimed, not conquered, not held in wary loan, but shared. Elissa exhaled a slow plume of steam into the cooling air. Alaris stepped forward and trailed his fingers along the gate pillar, which greeted him differently now than it had when he was a stranger. That Alaris, a different man from the one he was today, had ridden in what felt like an age ago, though it had not even been half a year. "Home," he said quietly to nobody in particular. "Home," Elissa answered, back in her human skin, from his side, and the word threaded through them both, anchoring promise and present tense at once. Alaris sighed out heavily. His quest was now truly and completely over, but the adventure of his lifetime was just starting.